Hey folks, there has never been a better time to learn banjo online through video lessons, and the best game in town is Peghead Nation, one of our sponsors. With Peghead Nation's streaming video courses in banjo, guitar, mandolin, fiddle, dobro, upright bass, and ukulele, you'll be able to learn bluegrass, old time, and plenty of other styles from some of the most talented players and instructors in roots music. PegheadNation.com features a great lineup of banjo instruction with some of these courses. Check it out. Beginning Banjo with Bill Evans, Bluegrass Banjo with Bill Evans, Clawhammer Banjo with Evie Layden, Wade Ward Style Banjo with Bruce Molsky, the Banjo According to Danny Barnes, and Contemporary Bluegrass Banjo with Wes Corbett. Now, no matter what course you select, they're all going to come with high-quality multi-angle video lessons, downloadable notation, plenty of tab, play-along tracks, and tunes and songs for you to learn. Perhaps best of all, if you join any of these Peghead Nation video courses now, you'll get your first month free just for being a Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast listener. So just go to pegheadnation.com and use the promo code PickyFingers at checkout. Another sponsor of the show is GHS Strings. We banjo players know that a banjo is only as good as the quality of strings that you put on it, and GHS has a long track record of providing the top quality in banjo strings to some of the top industry professionals such as Bela Fleck, J.D. Crow, Sonny Osborne, Todd Taylor, and me. I'm a GHS user, so check them out at ghsstrings.com. Now, if you ask me where I go to purchase my GHS strings, that answer is simple. It's the same place that I go for all of my banjo, guitar, and any other stringed instrument needs. It's Elderly Instruments here in Lansing, Michigan. They've been family-owned since 1972, and it's the world's most trusted source for new, used, and vintage instruments and all the accessories and strings that you might need. Now, if you aren't close enough to Lansing, Michigan to visit them in person, you can also see their entire inventory online at elderly.com, or feel free to give them a call to speak to a knowledgeable salesperson at 517-372-7880, or once again, see what they have at elderly.com. And now, on to the show.
I feel like I'm just kind of getting started with it, and I hope to not just like ripping off Earl Scruggs licks, but thinking about how to approach clawhammer in a way that does elevate melody and improvising. It's not just playing the tune over and over again with subtle variations, but really thinking about some of those improvisatory themes that you hear in bluegrass and jazz.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Picky Fingers Podcast. Keith Billik here. I hope that didn't throw you for too much of a loop, having the sponsor ads right there at the beginning. I was feeling a bit wild and crazy and decided to switch things up a little bit. Something that has not changed, however, is my appreciation for all of you joining me here. I have a great episode for you, but just in case you can't get enough of me, no, of course you can get enough of me, but we're all into this for more banjo content. So I encourage you to track me down on the social medias. I'm on Facebook, and there's a Facebook group just for podcast listeners that's called Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Listeners, fans, and friends, join up with that group and enter some really cool discussions that we have on there. You can follow me on the Instagram or the Twitter. You can reach out to me directly at pickyfingersbanjopodcast at gmail.com with any comments or suggestions or feedback, any of that stuff. Drop me a line. And of course, the best way to support the show is by going to patreon.com/banjopodcast, where you can chip in a small monthly financial contribution in exchange for some really cool prizes, which I will tell you about later. Today's special guest is Brad Kolodner. He is one of the biggest ambassadors for bluegrass and old-time music. He is a radio DJ for Bluegrass Country Radio and Radio Bristol. He produces a couple music concerts in the Baltimore area where he lives, and he is on the International Bluegrass Music Association, the IBMA's board of directors. And oh yeah, he also happens to be a fantastic clawhammer banjoist and plays with the Baltimore-based band Charm City Junction, as well as his father, Ken Kolodner, who is a world-renowned hammer dulcimer player. So he is a busy guy, but he is a wealth of knowledge about the banjo and about the music in general. And I really enjoyed sitting down and picking his brain for a while we were at IBMA, which will explain a bit of the background noise that you will hear through this interview. But it's not too distracting, and I know you will enjoy this interview with Brad Kolodner.
I am from Baltimore, Maryland, born and raised. I've been there my whole life, and have a house there and a great community and lots of friends. My family's there, so I don't think I'll be going anywhere anytime soon. Love Baltimore, Charm City, as we like to call it.
Great.
And I got into playing the banjo when I was 17. I was just about to finish up high school. Didn't really care much for the music that my father was playing all my life. He's a hammer dulcimer and fiddle player. His name's Ken Kolodner, an incredible musician, and I grew up immersed with his music around the house. I had to listen to it whether I liked it or not. He played in a band called Helicon, and back in the 80s and 90s, they were actually on Columbia and toured throughout Europe and North America, playing music from all over the world, traditional music on hammer dulcimer, flute, guitar, cittern. It was a real eclectic band.
Oh, dang.
And
That sounds really cool.
Beautiful music, and it was really the soundtrack of my childhood. My sister Hillary and I both listened to their music endlessly because it was not only in the house, but we went to their concerts, and it was just the world that we were immersed in. But it was also my father's thing, and it wasn't really like our thing. I was into sports and going to Baltimore Orioles games, and
yeah, you got to be rebellious, right?
Yeah. So, so I was a big classic rock fan and did the deep dive with my good pal in high school at the time. We would just listen to classic rock station, and whoever could guess the name of the artist first would get a point, and we were super competitive about it. But anyway, so when I went to this music camp that my father was teaching at in Maine called Meadowlark back in the summer of 2007, so 14 years ago now, and I went to the camp thinking I would just play soccer with the other kids at the camp and chill by the lake and go swimming. And my dad was like, if you're going to come to this music camp, you have to take some music classes. And it was for adults, a camp for adults. And he was teaching hammer dulcimer. My sister had been going for a few years. She was playing some fiddle just for fun.
Is that an older sister?
Younger sister.
Oh, okay.
And I was a little envious of all the fun she was having at this camp.
All right.
So went to the camp, enjoyed the scene, just being around these other folks around this incredible music scene there, and took a banjo class with Richie Stearns, a great clawhammer player out of Ithaca, New York. And I didn't know who Richie was. I didn't really know much, frankly, about what the banjo was about. I didn't know there was bluegrass and clawhammer, old time. I didn't really understand those differences. I just listened to my father's music. It all kind of sounded, and it didn't sound the same, but I could tell there were differences between the songs they played, but I didn't know anything about the genres or where all the different music styles originated.
Was banjo part of the mix of your dad's band at some
No, there
point?
was no banjo in the band. They seemed to have everything else covered. They had fiddle, guitar.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
There was some mandolin. They didn't have an upright bass, but there was definitely, they played a bunch of old time tunes in their sets. They played some bluegrass, and there was certainly very close to banjo music, but I don't think they actually had banjo in their band. They played some shows over the years with other bands that occasionally had banjo players, but it just wasn't anything that clicked with me until I went to this camp, and actually planned to go to this camp and was going to take the easiest classes. I was planning to take the singing class, or what I thought were the easiest classes. Singing, penny whistle, and harmonica, and the penny whistle class was full. The only other choice was the banjo class. I was like, why not? I'll sign up for this banjo class with this guy, Richie. He did a Johnny Cash song on clawhammer banjo. I didn't even know it was called clawhammer, but I was a big Johnny Cash fan from listening to all these classics and classic rock kind of. And so I heard him doing it in the staff concert on that first night of this camp in Maine, and thought, oh, Johnny Cash on the banjo, that's pretty cool. I like his music. So I signed up for the banjo class with Richie, totally clawhammer from scratch class. I actually borrowed one of Richie's banjos, and it had a goatskin head with the fur still on the head. And I was thinking, what in the world is this creature that I'm holding in my hands? This is pretty funky. Yeah. And learned how to do the very basic bum ditty on the banjo. Just, that first week, I could only do this. And it was the feeling of that right hand hitting those strings and like the tension of the strings. I just remember how it felt so cool in my hands. And it was so different than what I had associated the sound of the banjo with when I was younger. I didn't think much of it, but I suppose I was more familiar with like the three-finger style, which I love and play a little bit of, but something about the way clawhammer felt in my hand, particularly the right hand, like the way that my hand was sort of shaped to do that clawhammer bum ditty motion, just really appealed to me. And then came home and told my parents, like, hey, I like that week of playing banjo at Metal Arc. Anybody you know have a banjo? I think I'd like to keep working at it. And that's how it got started. I don't know if that sufficiently answered the question of how I'm a banjo player all the way up to this point, but at least that's how it got a banjo in my hands.
It sounds like it was probably a pretty important factor that you were able to hear Richie play music that was accessible to you to get you excited about it before you even went in. Do you think that was maybe it would have happened differently had you not had that connection?
Yeah, it's hard to know. If he had played, Cotton Eye Joe or like some classic old time tune that didn't really connect with who I was as a 17-year-old and what I was into at the time, you're right, maybe that wouldn't have resonated. There was some luck, I suppose, being that was like one of the only classes that had any space in it, and you're supposed to take 3 classes, so there was some of that. But yeah, I think you're right. Having a connection to music that I was into and was something that wasn't just my father's music. I mean, of course, my parents listened to Johnny Cash, but it was something that I had sort of discovered Johnny Cash's music and that connected with the banjo. I was like, oh, it's interesting merging of those worlds. I'll give it a try. So certainly.
So I imagine after you told your parents that you actually had a good time here, I'm guessing they were probably pretty supportive of this interest of yours.
I think in speaking to my father and my mom and dad both after that time, like looking back, they both were kind of on the sidelines thinking, like, wow, is he actually like into this? This is pretty cool. But they didn't really like come off at the time like, oh, wow, this is so cool that you're into the banjo. They were playing it cool. I think my dad in particular, for all those years, they didn't push music on us. They didn't like say that you had to play some stringed instrument. I played cello in the school orchestra, but I didn't really practice. They were nice. They signed us up for lessons and we worked on it a bit, but it wasn't something that was at like the center of our childhoods. They didn't, send us off to music camps and things when we were little kids or anything. And you have to play string band music.
So you knew you had those opportunities available should you have the motivation.
Exactly.
Or whatever. Yeah.
And I think it wasn't until I went away to college. I went to Ithaca College, actually, where Richie lives, and that was just sort of coincidence that I was actually hoping to be a broadcast journalist when I went off to college. I had no aspirations to do music or anything as a big part of my career, as it's turned out to be. But it just worked out that I went off to school at a place where there was a great old-time music scene and a great roots music scene, and the person who taught me banjo in that first week happened to live there. I ended up taking a couple lessons with Richie and sort of became I don't know if disciple is the right word. I love his playing and incorporate a number of his stylistic elements into my playing, but he's certainly a major inspiration. And so there's a lot of pieces aligned to come together as the clawhammer player that I grew into.
So what were some of those things that you think you learned from Richie that you said are big parts of your style now? I'd really love to hear about those.
Well, so for those of your listeners who don't know his music, he's a very percussive player, like super rhythmic, very syncopated. A lot of clawhammer playing has this kind of drony repetitiveness to it that is also very hypnotizing and groovy, and I love that about clawhammer. It can be super driving, and there's like a groove that you settle into that's very bouncy. And his playing is very improvisatory. It's really percussive. It crackles. It has this amazing
a lot of energy to it.
There's a punch to it, and so like a lot of things that he does. He plays up the neck a lot. There's a lot of cool stuff that he does with the left hand, but really it's the right hand doing all these interesting like triplets that he works into his playing. So he'll do these things instead of going like this is sort of a classic run. He might do. or all these cool little crackly things. They're really interesting little triplets, and they're really percussive. And then he'll also do this interesting like rhythmic syncopation on like the low end of the banjo. Like all this cool like left hand pull off stuff that's so much more pronounced than what you generally hear with a lot of clawhammer playing, or even honestly like three finger playing. There's so much of this like slapback of the instrument. That kind of stuff is just so, that like really stuck out to me. And then all these like wild runs where he'll just go, you know, it sounds so ridiculous to do it by itself, but if you're soloing or improvising, you know, that's something that really stands out, because there aren't too many clawhammer players out there that do a lot of improv. I mean, there's definitely improvising and variation in a number of players' approach, but you know, taking solos, like a 3-minute solo in a song on clawhammer is something that he does, and that was really appealing to me. I was like, oh wow, this goes well outside the AABB form.
What's this about? I feel judged right now. Keep walking. Well, that was something I really wanted to get to, but we could go there now. It was something that I really noticed, at least about your new album, is that there is a little bit more of that bluegrass mindset in terms of there are solos being traded on and off, and that's not quite as common with old time music. You think that is maybe traced back to?
Yeah, it might go back to Richie. Certainly some ideas I can trace back to his playing. I think a lot of it honestly has to do with the music that I play in the band Charm City Junction. So I play in this quartet with a great bluegrass fiddler, Patrick McAvinue, and he's won the IBMA Fiddle Player of the Year award. He's played with Daly and Vincent and on the Grand Ole Opry a lot. I'm just like so thrilled.
One of the best,
He's a very good pal. We lived together for a few years in Baltimore, and we play together, and he's sort of a musical brother at this point. And we come from different musical backgrounds. Like he grew up playing bluegrass and bluegrass fiddle, and he plays some jazz and can kind of just play anything. But I really, I think, was exposed to that style, that approach to fiddle tunes through playing with him and being in a band where we're really, and along with our accordion player Sean McComiskey and our bass player Alex Lacquemont, we're really pushing each other to sort of be featured at various points in the band. It's not like we are just a string band that plays a fiddle tune and just drives for 3 minutes and then on to the next fiddle tune and then here's a song and then another fiddle tune. It's really all four of us taking leads, taking the opportunity to play the melody and be featured. And so I think over the years, really working with that band, finding all kinds of new ways to sort of pop out and elevate the instrument in a way that isn't just accompanying the fiddle or just playing background, and not just backup. While I do love playing backup, one of my favorite things to do is to crash a bluegrass jam and play clawhammer backup licks, you know, those like Scruggs licks that you hear on three finger, but the like those kind of things which are super bluegrassy. And even on the new record, I have this like Foggy Mountain special. Or whatever it is, running out of space there. But
and then you do the Lester Flat part a little bit too.
Yeah, the little... Those, you mean that like the G runs,
the G run solo.
There's like no reason why those licks like don't work on clawhammer. And so, being a big fan of three finger playing, it's been a lot of fun to, as I've gotten into bluegrass through playing with Patrick and just going to bluegrass festivals with that band. I was really immersed in the old time music scene, going to festivals like Clifftop and Mount Airy, and I love playing straight ahead old time string band music. But the creativity and the improvisatory side of being around bluegrass music and going to things like IBMA and playing at all these bluegrass festivals as a clawhammer player, hearing all these three-finger players, I figured, well, I could spend the years that it takes to learn three-finger adequately, or I could just like skip and see what I can do on clawhammer. And it's a fun new world. I mean, it feels so fresh, you know, to hear like the clawhammer approach but with like the stylistic elements of Three Finger. It's really, it's, I feel like I'm just kind of getting started with it. And I hope to, on a future album or a future project, like even dig in further to that kind of, not just like ripping off Earl Scruggs licks, but kind of thinking about how to approach clawhammer in a way that does elevate melody and improvising. It's not just playing the tune over and over again with subtle variations, but really thinking about some of those improvisatory themes that you hear in bluegrass and jazz.
Well, I'm already looking forward to hearing that. That sounds awesome. Yeah, bridging that divide, I guess you could say. So it sounds like you improvise quite a bit. Why do you think that is not too common, at least with clawhammer playing? And then part two of that question would be like, how do you work on improvising, and what do you think you did to make that part of your repertoire?
Well, I think the nature of old-time music, being that it is dance music, and it's really, I think its earliest intentions are to provide a bed for a square dance or for cloggers, flat-footers. It's that driving groove that doesn't stray too far from the melody that allows you to stay focused on the collective groove as a band. It's not really a performance style where you have different people stepping forward. And so I think with that, the improvising that happens in old-time music, I generally say to folks that there's just as much improvising in old time, but you're sort of dancing around the melody. There's subtle variations. It's not like you're taking the stage and taking a solo that really deviates from the melody. Yeah, a lot of times in bluegrass, it feels like the improvising is based around the chord progression as much as it is around maybe the melody of the song. Mm-hmm. And in old time music, a lot of the improvising is sort of the subtle peaks and valleys that you can kind of dance between within the melody. And so it's sort of a different approach to improvising. And really when I play in an old time jam, I'm improvising all the time. Like every time through the tune, I'm playing it a little differently. And there's subtle things, maybe do a slide here, or a hammer on there, or maybe go up, to the third instead of the root, or just the little variations within the tune that can provide that tug and pull, that call and response that you hear between the fiddle and the banjo. But I think in old time with clawhammer developing with the groove of the fiddle, it's really a conversation between those instruments rather than somebody just playing backup while you step forward. And of course, there's all kinds of nuanced approaches to improvising in bluegrass as well. I don't mean to paint with too wide of a brush and overgeneralize, but I think you don't hear it as much in old time because I think just the nature of the music is that as a collective group, as a cohesive groove, you're really not trying to steal the limelight too much. And it's more about, the community approach as opposed to the performance style.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you said that because just saying improvising, you think of someone going wild with triplets or something like that, but there is a lot more to it. So I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, like
that rings true to hear what you said about it being more of a.
And just to demonstrate, like, here's a tune called "Fire on the Mountain," and like the first part, if I would just play the basic tune, would be something like this. So that's just like the first little line, but or like that subtle, three times through. I know they're really tiny variations, but to me, that's like just as satisfying creatively as it is for me to just, do something where it's the same, chord progression. Or, and those are all the same amount of time, where it's not really the melody anymore. Like I could have just done those three licks over that first chunk of the tune, and it would have worked in the context of the chord progression, but it doesn't necessarily capture the essence of the melody anymore. So it's just I think it's just a different approach to improvising. I don't think of it as like clawhammer players don't improvise. It's just a different approach to improvising.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know, what tools do you use to improvise? It sounds like you've maybe tried to take that next step to not leaving the melody behind per se, but do a little more of like solo playing rather than be part of this group.
Well, I mean, I will admit there are definitely some licks that, I'll work in there, and I think a lot of people have their kind of like go-to patterns that they play when they're improvising. I definitely, I'm trying to reference the melody as a means to sort of provide an outlet for those licks, but going beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I guess it really just depends on the tune or the song. I don't know if I have like a specific methodology to how I'll improvise in a song or a tune. I mean, of course, I'm trying to replicate the melody to a certain extent, but I think like for me, I feel like I want to be an interactive player as much as anything. Like I like stepping forward and taking solos and stuff, but I think mostly I get joy from the interactive nature of the music and hearing somebody play something on the fiddle or guitar and then trying to echo that bass run or echo that run they did. So I think a lot of times my improvising is informed by what I just heard somebody else in the band do or somebody else I'm playing with, maybe even a vocal inflection, some kind of change in their voice, some variation of one note, trying to like chase that. I feel like as an improviser, I'm commonly listening to what the people around me are doing, and then I'll kind of echo or capture what they're doing, and just so that and one of my favorite moments when I'm playing with other people is that like eye contact you make when you both realize that you've played something very similar, or that you're trying to chase the other person, or they've done a little variation, and then you immediately play that variation right away. Like that's one of the most satisfying things in life for me when I'm playing with another musician who hears a subtle variation that we both did. It's really satisfying. And some of you out there, many of you are banjo players and play this music, and you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, that like subtle eye contact you make occasionally when you're like, I heard that, I got that.
Or where you both do the same unexpected thing at the same time and just had that same musical sensibility, the unity of vision there. Yeah, it's very cool. So going back to your college days, it sounds like you mentioned that you had a good community of musicians up there at Ithaca. Was that your first experience of getting to play with groups and maybe even performing? Yeah,
that was when I really started to come into this music as something that was not just my father's music, but something that was mine, something that I could make friends through. And it wasn't just through the lens of my father's musical world. Nothing against it, what he has with his community and his pals, but to make friends by just sitting out on the quad or, going to local coffee houses or shows and meeting other people who are into old time music. I mean, I was pretty new. I could play, a couple dozen tunes freshman year of college. I wasn't really confident enough to just like show up at a jam and lead some tunes. I also play fiddle now and some guitar and bass, but I definitely play a lot of old time fiddle these days, but I wasn't playing back then. So it was hard as a clawhammer player to sort of make pals without like a fiddle player, without like someone to lead the tunes. But as I went through college, I started to meet some other pals in the music school who were interested in old-time music and some roots music, and started to play more with my dad when I would go home on breaks. So we would get together and figure out how to blend the clawhammer banjo with the hammered dulcimer, which aren't instruments that are really paired together very often. So that was a lot of fun to find some new textures with that combination. So I was playing a lot with him early on. And I had a couple musical pals in college. There's this great mandolin player named Riley, and this wonderful bass player who's now a big name in the bluegrass bass world, Ethan Yojevitz, and I overlapped for a couple years.
Yeah, he's outstanding.
Yeah, and he was honestly one of my first like musical pals, and we didn't play a ton together, but we'd play some of the hits, Big Soda or whatever.
Hits.
And we would play at the farmer's market occasionally. Those were some of the first people I played with, in my age bracket, who were into this similar kind of music.
This next question or two or three is just completely self-serving. So you went to school for broadcast journalism, you said. So it makes me feel terribly inadequate, not only as a banjo player to be around you, but to have you have this, trained radio awareness.
You're doing great. I love this podcast. I will gush for a moment. I've been listening for a while, and I appreciate what you do. You're doing a great job. No need to feel,
Well, I was hoping you'd have some tips, or like, do you get trained in interviewing when you take that course?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
What are, I don't know, give me what are some things that you...
I don't know if I'm qualified for that. Well, it's a different format. So I host a couple of radio shows on bluegrass country radio and on Folk Alley, and I curate hours of folk, bluegrass, roots music, and I definitely interview bands a lot. I mean, I don't know if I have any like tips. I mean, I think like the one thing that's a couple of things that are really helpful for me when I'm approaching the music. It may sound so silly, but like spending a good amount of time researching my guests, in advance. I imagine you've done that. It sounds like you have. But, there are a lot of interviews where I'll show up and the interviewer will just not have any sense of like who they're talking to. And it can be frustrating as an interviewee, when that happens. So, but that's like, you're a pro, like you've done your homework. And then I guess another thing, making sure that while I'm interviewing somebody, that I'm really listening to what they're saying as opposed to having like my set list. And I appreciate that you don't have like any questions in front of you or no. So for those of you in radio world or podcast world, Keith is not reading from a script or looking at any questions or even checking his phone. So that's cool that you're just coming up with these questions off the top of your head. But it is those two things, I think, as an interviewer, make it a lot more fun for me when I'm prepared, and then when I'm not necessarily following a set script. I'm just like really listening to who I'm talking to.
Give it the more conversational.
Yeah, and that's what you do on this podcast, and it's great.
I try, but I've also gotten myself up a creek, so to speak. If every once in a while the conversation might hit a dead end and maybe I can't think of something. So sometimes it is nice to have a few notes to rely on just in case, but
that is true.
I'll take the compliment and I appreciate it.
Well, and in that preparation that I do for interviews, I've interviewed, dozens of bands and artists over the years on both of those, on Bluegrass Country Radio. And a lot of the times there's music interspersed between each little bit of talking. So if I ever run out of something to say, what do you want to play next? Let's hear another song. That's an easy thing, but that's a different format, so Perfect. It's not really applicable here. But yeah, no, this is great.
Hey folks, we'll get right back to the interview, but I wanted to remind you that this show would not be possible if not for the support of my beautiful, lovely patrons of the podcast. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/banjopodcast, and it only costs a couple bucks a month to get in on some really cool rewards, which you can read about there. Today's very special Patreon supporter of the show is Angel Rogers and her son Braxton. Braxton has been laser focused on playing the banjo since hearing it on the Beverly Hillbillies, Andy Griffith, and Hee Haw. And since then, he's just been sponging it up as quickly as possible, taking lessons from Gary Biscuit Davis. So, Braxton, it sounds like you're on a good path. Good luck on your banjo journey, and I'm happy to be a small part of it. And thank you, Angel, for supporting not only Braxton, but this podcast. One of my favorite parts of the Patreon rewards is the VIP Lounge, which is a monthly video meetup with me and your fellow listeners. This month's monthly VIP meetup is going to be February 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope all of you Patreon supporters can join me for that. And for the rest of you, there's still time to sign up to be able to get that video link for this and all the future video meetups. So once again, head over to patreon.com/banjopodcast and become a supporter of the show yourself. I really couldn't do it without you. So what came next? Then you moved back to the Charm City. Did that band start pretty much right after college then?
Yeah, so I had recorded an album with my father while I was in college called Otter Creek. It had some original tunes, and so I was getting into the world of doing this, not as a full-time thing, but I was starting to approach with all the lessons I was teaching and some of the concerts with my dad and our recording. We started to work on a new album and in 2013, and then I met up with Patrick, who I mentioned earlier, and Sean, the accordion player in our band, at a local jam. There was an Irish pub in Baltimore called Liam Flynn's Ale House where my dad and I actually were hosting an old-time jam every other week. Mm-hmm. And there was also a bluegrass jam on the opposite Tuesday. And every Wednesday at this same pub was an Irish jam. And so I just popped into one of those jams and met Patrick and Sean and just chatted with them about the fact that we're both similar age, we all play traditional music, but we don't really play the same genre. And we were just thinking, let's just get together and have a jam and see what it's like. My dad and Sean's father, Sean McComiskey's father, Billy, legendary button accordion player, he actually played a lot with my dad back in the day because my father plays a lot of
small
Irish
world.
music. Yeah, this is a classic Baltimore thing. In Baltimore, we call it small-tomore because people stay there, they grow up, they stay there, they dig into the community. It's crazy how often that comes up when I'm in town. But anyway, so Sean and Patrick and I got together, started playing some tunes, and it was a lot of fun, to figure out, okay, how can we blend button accordion, climber banjo, bluegrass fiddle? There was more overlap than we were expecting. We were all very melody-oriented, very tuneful in our approach, and listening really well to one another. And so we were each giving each other space musically to kind of figure out what to do with this unusual combo. My buddy Alex Lacomont, bass player, who was living in Northern Virginia at the time, I met at Clifftop a couple years earlier, invited him up to play with us just for fun. And that was when the quartet was born. Charm City Junction formed in the winter of 2013. We played a couple of gigs because we realized, hey, this is a cool sound. This is really unique. Never heard anything like it before. We have a lot of fun just hanging out with each other. So let's give it a try. And played some shows, thought about recording an album because we all had already played with other people, had already recorded albums with other bands. So we were already kind of we had some of the tools to form a band, and pretty quickly came together, recorded a record on Patuxent Records, which is a label outside of DC, and then came to the IBMA conference. That was kind of our big first time out in public as a band in front of presenters, and that was a huge launching point for the group back in 2015. I think it was the fall of 2015. Yeah.
So that was actually going to be my next question, is how did people take that slightly unusual blend? I know some people are traditionalists enough that they might think it's weird, but it sounds like it was okay.
I think the traditionalists have a louder voice, an outsized voice than like the number of them who actually, I think a lot of people are willing to give it a chance when you say that it's, like clawhammer old-time banjo, like the roots of bluegrass, combined with Irish music, which is like the roots of old-time music, and then our bass player comes from like a jazz and classical background, which you could trace back even further. So there's a common thread between those styles of music. It's not like we're just lumping together four seemingly random styles of music. So there is a thread. So when you hear it, it sounds kind of like old-time music. But then if you come from like an Irish music background, you're like, oh, that's kind of like Irish music. And so it's funny because whenever we play a festival or a gig, people say, we love that old-time band, Charm City Junction. And then the next festival they'll say, here's a bluegrass band, the best bluegrass band in the town, And then it'll be like, they're such a great Celtic band, So the people don't even, like, they just kind of assign whatever they think it is to the band rather than us kind of projecting like, we're an old-time band or we're a bluegrass band. We kind of leave it up to folks to figure out what we're going for. Of course,
I imagine it expands the range of festivals and bookings you can look at.
Yeah, we've played some very straight ahead bluegrass festivals, and it's something that it doesn't, we aren't necessarily bringing in like the drums or electric guitars or things that kind of are repellent for some folks for some reason, but that's another conversation, because I love all that stuff. But it's usually folks are really receptive because we are playing traditional tunes. We'll play like old time tunes that are real like standard old time tunes, or we'll play a couple bluegrass songs, and 3-part harmony singing is recognizable. So there are elements of it that are really palatable, I think, to those respective worlds. But of course, there are always traditionalists. But whatever, we're very happy with the creative process and how we approach the music as a cohesive unit. We aren't like trying to say this one's an old time tune and we're going to do it all old timey. And here's we've never really told each other as a band like. We kind of have our own creative input, collectively. It's just the
band sound.
Yeah, it's just the band sound. It's not like we're trying to copy or go for anything specific.
Talk about your composing. I've been really enjoying your new album, Chimney Swifts.
Thanks.
And you mentioned bringing a lot of your compositions to the band as well. Do you have a specific approach or anything you can share about where those tunes come from? They're just real nice and catchy.
Yeah, thanks. I don't carve out enough time probably to write tunes, but I do find that it's in those moments in between other engagements where I feel like my mind is clear enough to write a tune. So for example, if like I have a lesson planned and a student doesn't show up, that's like the prime time to write a tune because I had already blocked away the hour. And so I'll go into my backyard or front porch, and instead of like checking emails or doing other stuff around the house, like I always view that as an opportunity to go ahead and try something out and just say, well, I reserved this time, which really means that I should just give myself more time to like write tunes. But, I think a lot of tunes come from little melodic nuggets that I just come up with while noodling on the banjo. I don't necessarily have like a specific process I think I find myself in nature a lot or outside when I'm writing tunes. Very rarely do I write a tune like in my dining room or in my office where I teach my lessons, or, anywhere I'm near my computer. I feel like that's just like I just shut down my tune writing ability because it's too close. I'm like, oh, I need to send off this email. Or
isn't that pathetic how distracted we get? All it takes is one little ding from your stupid device, and your attention is just torn away.
So I'll walk over to this little creek that's near my house called Stony Run, which actually I ended up writing a tune called Stony Run. It's the title track of the last album I did with my father. And so I find spots around my house or outside of my house where I'll go and sit for a while and come up with a melody or a tune. And that's why a lot of the tunes I write have nature-themed, Stony Run, or on the album there's Chimney Swifts, which are about these birds that are behind my house, or Catalpa Hop is this named after a tree that's in my front yard. Ants in the Honey Jar is a tune I wrote on the record, and that's a reference to being at Cliff Top and like sitting out in the woods and seeing these ants like crawling into this open honey jar. I don't know. So a lot of the tunes are written or at least inspired while I'm out in nature, sort of away from technology, and just it just feels more like it's just me and my banjo.
Along the lines of talking about the improvising and the trading of solos, some of those tunes are also not quite as traditional in the way that the chord progressions will shift a bit. You know what I mean? There's just more color in some of the changes, and I want to say it's the Chimney Swifts track in particular, although I'm really bad with titles of instrumental pieces, so forgive me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Is there anything to say about that, about where you get those ideas and how they develop?
I think one thing that's so interesting about clawhammer banjo, the wide range of tunings available. I think a lot of three-finger players usually play, standard open G. Maybe they'll do like a double C tuning, or, I guess standard C, like dropping the D down to a C on the fourth string. But besides that, I'm sure there are other tunings that three-finger players use, but that seems to cover a lot of it.
Yeah.
But in clawhammer world, there are probably 7 or 8 different tunings that I'll use regularly. There's open G, there's double C. There's this great tuning called Sawmill, which is, you think of like Shady Grove or some of those like the Cuckoo, some of those kind of haunting banjo tunes. Those are usually in that sawmill tuning, G, D, G, C, D. And then there's this one tuning, and I guess I can go to it real fast. Maybe it'll be interesting for all your Picky Fingers listeners to hear me retune to this crazy tuning. But this one's called Open D. So I take my G down to an F sharp, and you can obviously edit this out if it's really dull to listen to. So I leave my D there, and that goes down to an F sharp, and that goes down from a B to an A, and then I've got my first string still as a D. To adjust that a little bit, I've got these wonderful Rickard 10-to-1 tuners I love, and like before I've even strummed, you can tell it's this like really gorgeous sound, and it's so interesting. I don't know if you've ever heard this tuning before, but it's super cool, and maybe it is the one that is this the D that they use for like Rubin?
It is, yeah. Okay, there's a good handful of
okay. Well, I'm just making a fool of myself. Well, I don't know. At least for me, this is like this. When I first discovered this, I didn't know any like the tunes that you play in this one.
Yeah.
So is this like the Rubin tuning, like Osborne Brothers, like Ruby or some of those?
I don't know about Ruby, but definitely like Rubin, Earl's version of John Henry. There's Rockwood Deer Chase is like a pretty cool one, a Don Stover tune, and there's some others, but
so clearly infiltrating your as a clawhammer player, showing that I don't know as much about three finger.
No, but point taken that you clawhammerers do need to get around a lot of different tunings that are less common for us.
So so I think like the tune Chimney Swifts grew out of noodling in this tuning. so on. I could play it for a while, but it's this super interesting. I don't know, like having that third as the fifth string note is so captivating, and having these funky chords.
That's what I was trying to get at.
All that kind of that. It's not really dissonance. It's just so much color, like you said. That kind of sound, or there's just so much to be had.
And I think the fact are all the pieces on that album, are they all duets?
Mostly, there are probably 7 or 8 duets, a few solo things, and then there are also a couple. There's 2 tracks that are quartet pieces with all folks who lived at my house at some point. Patrick McAvenue playing mandolin. He's also a great mandolin player. There's no fiddle on the record, and I'll get into that in a second. And then there's Alex on bass, and then a great guitar player in Baltimore who lived with me for a number of years named Lucas Johanny, and he plays guitar. So that group of 4 of us lived together for a while, so I kind of wanted to reference that with a couple of tunes as that sort of house band. We call ourselves the Tater Patch Kids because I called my house the Tater Patch in Baltimore, which is a common old-time tune. So anyway, we got a couple of tunes as that quartet. But yeah, there's no fiddle on the album, and that's something I just decided to do because I play with fiddlers so much in Charm City Junction, and with Ken and Brad, we've got a great fiddler, Rachel Eddy, who plays with us, and my dad and I both play fiddle as well. But it was important to sort of showcase clawhammer as a melodic voice, and not necessarily that I love the fiddle, and I love fiddle tunes. It's like my favorite thing in the world. But I also wanted to showcase how clawhammer can be a melodic voice, and your ears just kind of go to the fiddle when you hear it playing a melody. So it not to say that I wanted all the attention for the banjo, but kind of did. Just wanted to showcase clawhammer.
It's definitely a banjo album.
And that's what I was going for, especially in the depths of the pandemic, needing a creative outlet. Well, it's just me and my banjo for the past year, so might as well just play a bunch of banjo tunes.
Right. Well, and to your melodic point, even further on in that tune, you have a nice up the neck break too, which I know from experience in open D is tricky, getting that major third to sound right up the neck. That can be a little squirrely. Yeah,
and I've definitely spent a lot of time with clawhammer in particular. When I go up the neck, thinking about how to maintain the tension and the rigidity of both my left and right hand so it doesn't get too floppy. Because I think sometimes when I'm playing clawhammer, it's really like, it almost sounds muddy as you go up the neck. It sounds sort of muted. And I've spent a lot of time making sure that, my finger's like right behind the fret, super precise. Not to say that this isn't what like 3-finger players think about as well, but with clawhammer, like the main key with that clarity up the neck is, for me, maintaining tension in my right hand, which is basically my pick hand. I don't have picks on my fingers. I just have these long, scary-looking fingernails. And fortunately, just happen to have really strong nails and must have had plenty of milk.
Drink a lot of milk,
carrots or whatever when I was a kid. But like I've got these nails, but it's not just the nails. It's maintaining tension in my right hand such that it's like almost a firmer pick, like you'd play on guitar, like a soft pick versus like a thick pick,
So firm where? Like your finger joints?
So, your hand's in this claw shape with your fingers curled around, your thumbs curled around. So when I venture up the neck, I'm thinking about how not only do I get my left hand to, hit the right fret, but like the right hand, that's where all the magic is when you're playing clawhammer. Because, a lot of clawhammer players kind of within the mix of a band, you don't necessarily hear all the details. And I'm really trying to be clear and prominent like you'd hear a 3-finger player when they're taking a solo. You can hear all the notes. And so for me, like the main thing with my right hand is that the claw that I use, I kind of increase the tension in my hand. Like I just kind of grip that claw a little firmer. So, if I'm playing, up the neck, something like, I'll just demonstrate like kind of a loose right hand. Like I won't have too much. It'll just be kind of like a very relaxed right hand. It'll sound like this. And that's, it's pleasant enough, but it's not super clear as opposed to, let's see. So like all those notes, I'm being kind of delicate here, but you can tell that, the clarity, all those notes are there. And what I'm doing is with my right hand, instead of, here I'm just sort of like keeping a relaxed right hand. And then if I increase the tension in that hand, So all I've done is just sort of add a bit of tension instead of, I'm playing softer there, but like all of those notes, it's not just my left hand.
Yeah.
I know I'm really diving into the depths of right hand technique
No,
for
I love
clawhammer.
it. I love it. Keep going.
But that's really how I'm able to, when I go up the neck, let's see if I can play a tune or something that you might recognize. Yeah, so, off the cuff there, just kind of thinking about, how to make sure that all those melody notes are really prominent and on like a nice even plane and not popping out or getting too soft, but really thinking super technically about how to maintain that right hand approach in that, the main technique I'm using is it's called drop thumb. And, a lot of clawhammer playing is built around this bum diddy pattern. And you could just play that all day, You don't need to do anything else. But as soon as you start incorporating the thumb as a melody note, you go from, let's see, what was that tune? Blackberry Blossom. And then adding in drop thumb. Like that kind of stuff, you suddenly get all this melodic.
It's a whole other dimension.
And not only that, but you get all this cool rhythmic stuff that you can do, these really cool syncopated things. Let's see. That's a tune called Black Eyed Susie. I'm just goofing off here. That's like way too many variations for that through that tune. I was just trying to throw the whole kitchen sink out. But, you get the idea that with this right hand thumb, the notes that you leave out, it creates all this cool space for all these interesting. I don't know. It's just so groovy and funky.
Real
and
funky,
it's so funky, and I'll even just like rip off like Tony Rice guitar. Or I don't know, whatever. I'm just totally nerding out here. But yeah, you get the idea that like you can do those melodic things that you hear from like a syncopated 3-finger player or like a kind of a bluesy mandolin solo or a guitar solo or something. And like it's totally possible in clawhammer. You just have to figure out how to get the drop thumb to fit in the right spot and to leave out notes. And I don't know how far down you want me to go on this road, but like a huge part of it is also using the percussive nature of the instrument, using the head of the banjo to get all these really interesting textures. You could play a tune, or you can go. Like my left hand is basically the same there, but I just did this cool head tap thing where it's super open and flowing, and it has this really nice kind of cadence to it that's not as busy, as some banjo playing can get.
And those are all tools that you use just at various times to create the sound that
different
you want.
Sonic atmospheres is the fancy phrase I'll use, but trying to think about the theme of the song. Is it a driving up-tempo tune, or is it something that I want to have a lot of space and some of that flowing, mellow side of the banjo? And there's so many different voices you can get with clawhammer using really a lot of right-hand techniques, using drop thumb. I call it the ghost strum, this like it's just so pleasant. I can just do that for hours. That's such a pretty sound. And that's really, I think, what draws me into clawhammer is that it isn't just the same thing over and over again. There's so much textural variety, and that's great for playing, fiddle tunes up to speed, but also playing waltzes or playing tunes in unusual, time signatures or things that are just not what you'd expect just your standard driving clawhammer sound to be, which I still love, but there's a lot of versatility in this approach.
Yeah. I was going to ask back when we were talking about Richie Stearns, but we'll circle back to that now. Who do you consider some of your other major influences, and maybe give, maybe some specific ways that these people have influenced your playing banjo or not?
Yeah, well, there's no question that the other major influence of mine is Adam Hurt. Huge fan of his playing. I know he's been on your podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And just an incredibly sensitive, lyrical player. Richie is also a major influence for Adam. I know Adam grew up listening to a lot of Richie's playing and maybe even talked about that on your podcast. I don't recall, but Adam, I know, is a big Richie fan. But Adam is such a different player. He's very melodic, lyrical. Yeah. There's a lot of emotion in the playing, really precise. And so I was really drawn to that. I think largely because I grew up around music with my father's band Helicon. They're very clean. They have like this beautiful arrangements, great dynamics, really interesting sense of harmony, lots of variation. So there's a lot of subtlety in Adam's playing that I think connected with what I was really appreciating about my father's band and his music, and his approach to the hammered dulcimer kind of reminded me of how Adam approaches the banjo with all these interesting arrangement ideas, and not just technical prowess, but not overplaying and being really precise, but also really musical. And so, someone like Adam, like really clean, but also like there's surprising moments too. And so when I heard his tune, I think he does this great version of Big Coyote, which I mentioned earlier actually. And I heard that for the first time when I was in college, listening to a record of his and thinking, whoa, that is so beautiful. I've never heard clawhammer like that. And so I, went off and tried to learn it and took a workshop from Adam. And in fact, I play a banjo made by the same builder of Adam's banjo. This is made by a builder in D.C. named Kevin Enoch, and it's an open back banjo. Although for those of you out in radio world who can't see it, it actually does have a little resonator on the back. It has this flush fit resonator, which is made by Ohm Banjos, who actually met at IBMA a number of years ago, and they built this resonator that kind of fits on the back of the pot that helps project the sound forward. So it's kind of a hybrid banjo, but it's made by Kevin Enoch, and it's the same instrument that Adam plays.
What was it about Adam? Just the whole package with that guy, really. Just the lyrical, the sensitivity. He's a kind of a virtuoso too.
Yeah. I think as I mentioned earlier that like really tasteful approach to the banjo and elevating the banjo as a solo instrument, primarily on his records. The banjo is front and center, has fiddle on a few tunes, but really. And he's a great fiddler too, but having, clawhammer represented in such a melodic way, it's really the first time of course there are some great old recordings from some of the legends, Wade Ward and, like Tommy Jarrell and all these like great legends of banjo. There are solo recordings of banjo, but in terms of the way that Adam approaching melody on the banjo, that was just mind-blowing to me. And, I'm really attracted to melody, and as a clawhammer player who plays melody a lot, it just is at the time really eye-opening when I first heard his playing. I incorporate some of Richie's influences, some of Adam's, and then all the other musicians I've met along the way have, little melodic ideas, little backup ideas. I listen to guitar players, thinking about bass runs, I'm listening to fiddlers and how they use different rhythmic bowings and how to kind of echo that kind of pulse that you hear from fiddlers, in my playing. So there's all kinds of other instruments that inform how I approach it. But banjo side of things, Adam and Richie are kind of the two that I always sort of can trace back, my origins.
Those are good choices. I don't know a whole lot of clawhammer players, but I know those two guys and fully agree with everything you said. All right, back to your banjo, the Enoch. What's the... Give us all the specs. Like, what model is this?
It's kind of a custom model in that it's based off of Kevin's. He's a builder. He's in Beltsville, Maryland, and he builds banjos out of his garage. He's just a legendary builder in like the old time banjo world. Adam plays one of his, and I took a workshop from Adam 2009, maybe it's 2010, and just tried out Adam's banjo. I was playing a gold tone CB100, and it was a great banjo to start on, and I was looking for an upgrade, played Adam's, and I just loved the response, sort of the bell-like tone, especially when I'm up the neck. Whenever I play up the neck on this banjo, let me think of a good tune. Let's see. Here's a little bit of a tune called Waynesboro. When I go up the neck on this instrument, it just has this bell-like quality.
Yeah, it sure does.
Beautiful notes up the neck that sustain, and it's so lovely up the neck. And I think that's why I was really attracted to this instrument. And I think a lot of it has to do with, there's a few variables here. One, it's an 11-inch rim. A lot of clawhammer players play with a 12-inch rim for that kind of more mellow, thumpy sound, which is really nice solo or in a duo context for sure. But for that clarity and that punch that I look for, especially playing a lot of bluegrass inspired music, I like to have some punch and clarity. And so the bell-like quality of the 11-inch rim combined with the brass spun rim, so there's a brass rim on this banjo. And then there's also the Dobson-style tone ring, which is very bell-like in its sonic quality. So it has a lot of sustain, a lot of ring to it. And then I think this resonator that I have on the back, this flush-fitting resonator, and what I mean by flush fit is it doesn't really go outside the rim of the banjo. It kind of fits flush with the rim, so it's the same size as the rim, 11 inches across.
Yeah, if you look at it from the front, you don't necessarily know that it's there.
Yeah, but it really allows the sound, especially when I'm playing into a microphone, because I do a lot of performing, it's nice to have the sound sort of funneled towards who I'm playing for, and then also just focuses the tone. So it's not like it makes it, sometimes when I play a resonator banjo, like a normal resonator banjo, it gets kind of muddy when I'm playing clawhammer with all the strumming, but this somehow is able to kind of keep the focus of the clawhammer sound, but without making it too muddy. And so those are probably the biggest things. And then the head is really tight. It's a Renaissance head, but I have it cranked up super high. And then I have this little bone insert bridge that adds a little bit more sustain. A lot of clawhammer playing, kind of the decay of the notes is pretty immediate. So on this, with having the bone insert bridge, it has these little white pieces of, they might just be plastic, but I don't know. So these help sustain the tone a bit. Yeah, medium gauge strings, action's pretty low on the fingerboard. And
does that gold star sticker help the tone quite a bit? have you done some testing on that?
That's right. That makes all the difference. That's the secret. Yeah, that was $1,000 little star sticker.
Right, the audiophile grade.
No, that's it's a funny story actually. At Clifftop, which is where I really got hooked on old time music. Not of course. I mean, being in Ithaca was inspiring and all that, but really Clifftop was the place where I really got my old time music interest cemented, surrounded by thousands of people who just love old time music, staying up all hours of the night playing tunes. It's just so much fun. And so one night, I don't know, at festivals, I like to bring these temporary tattoos and pass them out. It's just sort of a fun, festive thing. I keep them in my banjo case. It's goofy, and I'll bring them to festivals. And one night, we were just putting on glitter tattoos, going down to the Cajun tent to dance, and then have a late night jam. It's just silly. And so one of my friends actually put the glitter tattoo on their banjo head, and I was like, "Whoa, that is a power move! Just to take the star and put it on your banjo head." And so the next year, I actually saw her, and she still had it on her banjo. A year later, and I was like, "You know what? That's impressive." It was a goatskin head too. It was like a nice banjo head. And sure enough, I said, "Well, it actually looks pretty cool, so I'm going to put one on my head too. So I put this little gold star on my banjo as I don't know, a little nod to my clifftop life and how much I love that festival.
Yeah, little something to remember it by. That's cool. And to go back to that resonator thing, I just wanted to, can I see that a little? Yeah. Okay. So it actually does have a gap between the back of the rim.
Yeah,
and
it's this round piece of wood that does, I don't know what the right term is, but it's not totally flat. It does kind of come out a little bit.
Yeah,
maybe
concave.
Concave, yeah, the resonator banjo speak. Don't quite have it down. But yeah, so there's that, and then it has these posts that have this felt on it, so it kind of just fits onto the back of the banjo. I can just slide it on and off pretty easily.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And it's actually really comfortable. So a lot of you resonator players, you're used to having a resonator sit up against your stomach when you're playing. But for us clawhammer and open back banjo people, we're so used to playing with like
getting
jabbed with all the hooks. And so it's kind of nice actually to have the banjo sitting just another inch off my body, and with this nice soft, like, it's just such a more pleasant feeling to have a resonator up against me rather than like the hooks and the edges of the banjo rim jabbing into me. So
kind of a win-win with the tone
it's
and the comfort. Yeah.
It's a nice tone. I feel like this will be the next big thing in the open back banjo world. It was something that Ohm came up with for one of their banjos, this like clip-on resonator. And I just thought, it sounded cool on the banjo that I was playing of theirs. I think it was their Mira model. And I thought, well, what if I just like figure out how to get it to fit on my other banjo that I play a lot? Uh-huh. And so I've been playing and recording with this flush fit resonator for 3 or 4 years now. It's really comfortable. It means that I don't have to play super hard, because when I'm in a band with an accordion and a bluegrass fiddle player, a bass player, and also playing with my dad, who's a hammered dulcimer player, it's like a lot of sound to compete with as a clawhammer player. And too often clawhammer gets buried in the mix. So I was like, how do I get some more
helping
power
you out
without like digging in harder? Because then you sacrifice tone if I just have to like lay into my banjo all the time. And I do have a pickup in here as well, but it's, when I'm plugged in. But for those times when I'm not plugged in, it's really nice to have that extra oomph.
Yeah. I noticed that there's at least one other really nice sounding banjo on your album that must be like a gut string fretless or something like that.
Exactly. I don't have it with me, but it's a gourd banjo. It's a very large head. It's like maybe 6 to 8 inches deep, and it has this big calabash gourd with a goat skin strapped over it, made by a banjo builder in Maryland who works a lot with Kevin Enoch. Actually, his name's Pete Ross. He lives in Baltimore. He's a neighbor of mine, and an incredible builder of gourd banjos. And it's a beautiful instrument. I mean, the neck is fretless, like you correctly pointed out, and it has these nylon strings. It has these geared tuner pegs that look like friction pegs, but they do have little gears in them, which makes my life way easier when I'm on stage trying to go from the key of D all the way up to the key of V. And by the way, I keep it tuned low, so it's down a couple steps, and that's why it has that really punchy growl to it. It's very tense banjo, and it's got a good amount of volume. It cuts through really nicely. Also has a pickup in it, which is nice when I play on a bigger stage.
You have a pickup in a gourd banjo.
Yeah, well, it's actually not too different than what like kora players use. So a lot of those West African gourd instruments, played on big stages. There's a precedent for putting a pickup inside like a gourd type instrument. So that's the pickup I have in it, is one that you would see like in a kora. Or something like that. The gourd banjo was an instrument that I was exposed to. There's a guitar store in Ithaca. I bought a gourd banjo that was just hanging on the wall and made by a local lamp maker, a gourd lamp builder in Ithaca. And I was like, that gourd banjo looks cool. I'm going to give it a try. And, it's the same setup. It's 5 strings, and you just basically have to learn how to get your right hand to accommodate the nylon string feel, which is a little bit looser. It's a different it's set up similarly, but it's a different feel.
And then the fretless aspect,
and then the fretless
of course,
aspect, you get all these cool in-between notes. And it's also a really nice opportunity when I'm playing concerts to sort of provide some of the context for this music and old-time music and where it comes from, and the really complicated history of this music coming from, enslaved Africans and the roots of the gourd banjo, as it evolves into the banjo that we all love and play today. So there's an interesting opportunity with that instrument, especially being from Baltimore, where the banjos were first commercially manufactured in this country. The first banjo company was in Baltimore, right in downtown Baltimore, made by William Boucher back in the mid-1800s, and had a shop right in Baltimore.
I didn't realize that was Baltimore. Cool.
And so that was really where a lot of the first banjos were commercially manufactured. A drum maker who started building banjo necks to add on to the drums because there was this new popular banjo demand out there. And so that's really how that got rolling. And so the instrument actually has like a headstock that's modeled after the Boucher headstocks. So there's a nod to Baltimore in that instrument as well. So it's really
Is that a scroll?
Yeah, it's got that kind of scroll look.
Right, like a sideways fiddle
They'll call it
headstock.
like a minstrel style.
Yeah.
And again, it's an interesting opportunity to bring up like the minstrel show past of the banjo. And so it's not that I necessarily dive deep into that into every concert, but I think it's sort of, as a performer, feel obligated and a responsibility to at least mention and allude to and inform folks about the history of the instrument and dive deeper if they so choose. And
plant a seed.
Yeah, planting a seed. And I think the gourd banjo, it sounds great. It's fun to play. It's super groovy. I love it. It's super deep and warm and punchy. But it's also, a nice opportunity to plant the seed about the history of the instrument.
Very cool. Is there anything else that people need to know about you and your banjo career and journey and style?
Well, I think I play a lot with Charm City Junction, as we mentioned. We've got a couple of records. I've played with my dad a fair bit, and we have 4 albums actually over the years combining banjo and hammered dulcimer. And then, I have this new solo album, Chimney Swifts. And I guess the other big piece, besides the broadcasting element of my career on Folk Alley and Bluegrass Country Radio, is that I have an online banjo lesson channel for clawhammer, hosted on this site called TrueFire. And I have a channel that's much like a Patreon subscription where you sign up, and every month, I post some new videos. There's, tune tutorials, technique lessons, tabs, performance videos, exclusive stuff. And it's called Clawhammer Corner. It's on TrueFire, and it's actually been a really nice thing to develop during the depths of the pandemic, having an outlet for teaching and having some time to craft my approach, because I do a lot of teaching at workshops and camps and private lessons for years, and so it's nice to be able to have an outlet for that. So I have that online course through TrueFire.
And now you kind of have a curriculum sort of setup that you'll be able to use forever.
Exactly. There's a beginner, clawhammer from scratch series. So for all you who are interested in clawhammer and have a banjo but don't know how to start, there's a beginner series. There's also stuff for intermediate and advanced players. It kind of covers and goes into the weeds of, many elements of clawhammer, and it's growing. And that's been a really fun thing to grow this past year or so.
Yeah, you're a busy dude.
Yeah, I embrace the hustle and love, many elements of the industry and logistics and how things work and, fine-tuning different elements of my own personal career. But there's just so many inspiring people who work in this world, in this bluegrass and old-time and roots music industry. And I'm just a fan of learning more about how to really make it more open and accessible and welcoming and growing in a way that's sustainable. And I find all those things, those community organizing is another piece of what I do. I run a festival called the Baltimore Old Time Music Festival every year, which is an annual festival that brings in old time string bands and artists from around the country, held every spring. Usually we have it, we haven't done it in a while, but we're hoping to do that festival soon. Depending on when this podcast airs, we do have a festival in 21 in the fall and then in 22 in the spring. And that's a huge, endeavor that I do with my father, really boosting the local Baltimore old time music scene. And we do a lot of work in the community. There's a lot of history of old time and roots music even in my neighborhood, Hazel Dickens lived 2 blocks from where I live now in Baltimore,
cool.
in the Hamden neighborhood. And so there's a lot of history in Baltimore with bluegrass and old time music. So it's really nice to be able to dig into the scene and help grow the local community through hosting jams and running a square dance and then this festival as well. So I'm really invested in the Baltimore old time music world. So that was a very sort of fast description of the many kettles that are on the fire. But
that's really impressive. It's good, best of luck and keep it up. Those are all really great, endeavors to be taking on.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan. I know I've infiltrated enemy walls here on this three-finger podcast, but I appreciate that you're giving an opportunity to other banjo players. And, I think there's a lot of overlap in the way that, we approach music, whether you're a clawhammer player or a three-finger player, and, playing in a string band setting, there's so much overlap. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
It's fun to make like a tribal warfare aspect out of the three-finger versus clawhammer, but it's all in good fun.
It's not, there's no need for that. I'm just playing, but it's, and I think there's a lot of mutual respect, for three-finger players, for clawhammer players, and the other way around. It's really nice to see that, especially now, there are so many bands out there that kind of use both. And like Three Finger is now in more old time music than I've heard in many years. It's great to hear some Three Finger. And I will admit, like during the pandemic, I did work on some Three Finger rolls. I learned my, some of the standards. So, watch out. Just give me like 10 years and maybe.
Okay. Well, next year at IBMA, we'll do part 2 of the interview.
I don't know if I can promise that.
Show off your three-finger chops.
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
All right. Well, thanks again, Brad.
Thanks for having me.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Picky Fingers podcast. Thank you so much for listening. The song clips that you heard in this episode were Catalpa Hop by Brad Kolodner, Mazurka Limousine by Helicon, Billy in the Low Ground by Richie Stearns, Turkey Trot by Charm City Junction, Chimney Swifts by Brad Kolodner, Wake Up Susan by Adam Hurt, and another one by Brad called Old Aunt Jenny. Thank you once again to Angel Rogers and her son Braxton for being the Patreon supporters of the show. Head over to patreon.com/banjopodcast to support the show yourself. Everyone have a great week. Take care, and I will see you next time.